Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is TV Sky, and let's talk a little bit about Sweetheart Xayah and Rakan, because these two skins have been at the center of a bit of a kerfuffle with the community as relates to their relative quality and the money that Riot would like us very much to pay for it, as compared to other skins of similar quality, and indeed compared to some of the fan edits that have been cropping up on the subreddit. Now, this type of criticism is always fair. I think we should start there. This type of criticism is always fair. It's always fair to go to a big company like Riot or EA or Blizzard or Activision or any one of them and say, no, we think you should do better. We think you need to do better with these things before we're going to pay money for it. It's the same thing with the Hanzo skin that had a bit of a controversy about how ugly it looked a ways back. And it's the same thing with this. Whenever the customers go to a large company and say, no, you need to do better before we'll hand over our money, that criticism is always fair. You always have to be willing to push in order to make a company do better. That having been said, while that criticism is totally fair, when I first saw Sweetheart Xayah and Rakan, I was kind of fine with them. Like, I didn't really give them much thought. They were holiday-themed, lovey-dovey skins, and not really in my wheelhouse, so I didn't really look twice at them when they first came out. So when the controversy started kind of erupting on the subreddit and the community in general, where people were quite upset about the way that these skins look, as indeed you can see from the dislike ratio on this SKINSPOTLIGHTS video I've got running here, I was a little surprised, because to me they were just perfectly fine, competent, not really worth writing home about, not worth getting upset about or anything. But like I said, the criticism is always fair. So insofar as I can give a useful take on this, and the reason I'm talking about this is because someone asked me to, is I think the most sensible thing I can do is take a look at the changes that Riot made, and then take a look at some of the fan edits and compare them and see how they solve, you know, the various problems that the skins might have, and whether or not Riot's or the fans' edits might be the best for the skins overall. Now, again, you can always say they should do better in general. Like, the skins should be higher quality, there should be better effects, there should be better textures, whatever. You can always say it should be better, and that criticism is always fair. But here, we're just going to be taking a look at what is there, and how some people have imagined that they might change it. So here we have a base comparison of the original release on the PvE of Sweetheart Xayah, as well as the edits that Riot have made to her since. Now, the edits that Riot made to the skins after feedback have been very minor. They really haven't changed very much about the skins, because, well, it kind of seems to me that, first of all, Riot thinks that these skins are in a good place, that they are not that far out of line with the quality that they want them to have, and also one of the artists who worked on the skins commented on Twitter that it would be difficult to make any more substantive changes to the skins, because it's not just changing texture. You have to do changes to the modeling, and you have to do perhaps some changes to the rigging when you implement too drastic changes. So they can only really do so much without having to take the whole set of skins back to the drawing board and kind of start over. It's the same thing we saw some time ago with the Zone Chaos skins that a lot of people were unhappy with, and which Riot ultimately retracted, was they couldn't fix them. They could not fix the skins as they were, so they just had to kind of pull them back. And this is something that Riot, to their credit, have been willing to do when a set of skins are clearly below the quality line. They will retract them, and they will take another pass at them. So the changes to Sweetheart Xayah and Rakan, I believe, yeah, these are the changes. You can see here is Xayah's original release, and here are the changes that they made. If you're having trouble spotting the changes, that is no surprise. Mostly they added a shoulder pauldron, a little bit of detail on the arm, a little bit more detail around the chest area with some extra color, and a little bit of extra texture detail around the model. But mostly they left her unaltered and unchanged, and the same thing goes for Rakan, who received a few color streaks to his hair, a few changes to the textures here and there, but otherwise relatively minor changes to the color and texture. You can see the skin tone also changed a little bit. Compare that to something like this edit by Red Sinistra, who took the original screenshot of the model and painted over it to create something that they felt was of a higher standard of quality, and indeed it is. It is a much prettier skin, for sure. It adds a lot of detail. It makes him look more princely, sort of more dignified, where the old skin makes him look a little bit like a sort of a theater Lothario, sort of a romantic character you might see in a pantomime play. This looks much more like a fairy tale kind of princely type of character because of all the added textures and all the added details. And here's an edit of the Xayah skin, where, who the heck was the artist in this one? I think I have the name. It's Pika XXU 155 on Reddit. Not sure if they have a DeviantArt page or whatever. Here we have the clean version. This is before Riot's changes, and what they decided to do is add a bunch of feathering and give her a an earring, as well as some textures on the dress with some hearts on it. Now, the thing about in-game models like this is that the view we have of these models in these comparison shots is just not ever going to be the view you have in-game. And therein lies the problem with making major edits to these skins, with adding a lot of detail to them, is that in the real game, we don't generally look at them this close. In a gameplay situation, the camera isn't really this zoomed in. It's much closer to a perspective like this, where insofar as there's a lot of detail on the character, we can't really make it out. We can't really make out a lot of the fine detail on the character, and therein lies the problem. Because if you take a look at the edits like Red Sinistrus, which is it's a really pretty edit. Like, this is a gorgeous looking character, but consider the types of changes that have been made to the skin. Primarily, a lot of frills and stuff have been added to his shoulder pauldron. There's extra feathers going on. There's some more detail on the heart. There's a crown. There's some texturing on the feathers of his cloak, as well as some texture on the legs, and this belt thing going around, and some changes here and there. All of this is relatively fine detail. You can see extra frills being added to the cravat or whatever it is he's wearing there. All of this is relatively small detail, as well as a choker around his neck, which I think is a cute little touch. All of this is very minor detail. It's very small details. So if we say that the model in-game will be more the size of this on your screen, take a look at what that does to the color profile, where on the left the model is relatively clean. You can relatively easily distinguish individual parts of the model. Here are the legs in a dark color, here's the shoulder and the cape in a brighter color, and here is the arm piece and the torso in a different color still. Here, a whole bunch of extra colors are being added in, a whole lot of extra little color surfaces, and the belt around the waist has the unintentional effect of kind of blending the transition between legs and torso. And the textures on the cape, those fine sort of purple spiral textures that was put on there, they kind of disappear. It's really... So what you get is that this skin on the right, the edit, looks more noisy than the one on the left. And when I say noisy, I obviously don't mean with sound, but I mean visually noisy, which means there's a lot more detail there, a lot more things that the eye kind of has to keep track of. And when it is in motion, that can get kind of distracting, and that can confuse the eye as to the exact makeup of the model and the exact animation. Now, it's not going to be a huge issue. This is sort of minor tweaky-beaky stuff. It's not going to be a huge issue. It's not like, oh, the model on the right is totally unplayable, but it is more work for the eye to take in. Something that Riot generally tend to be pretty conscious about is keep it simple, stupid, which is a rather important principle, is the word I'm looking for. Principle in visual design is that detail is nice. Like, adding more detail to something almost always makes it look nicer, and a lot of the times it makes it look cooler, but it doesn't necessarily make it easier to read from a visual perspective. And the same thing goes for the edit on the Xayah here. It's less pronounced, but for example, these tiny textures on the skirt, the heart textures, which look really nice. I mean, I really like them. I think they're really cool. They're not visible when you're this zoomed out. They're practically invisible. And take a look at what happens to the shoulder area of Xayah. Now, in the official version right now, the shoulder area with the arms is very clearly delineated from the waist, which is cut through by the golden belt or whatever she's wearing. Then you have the dress, then you have the legs, and then the cape. And it's relatively easy to read the shape as human. Take a look at the one on the far left, though, because of the added colors to the bust and the feathering and the earring that's hanging down, that gets muddled just a little bit more. And it's not that it's it's not that it's completely unreadable. It's not like, oh, you could never play a game that looks like this. League has had worse looking character models by far that worked pretty fine. It's still more noisy. And when you are zoomed out enough to be in-game, to be playing, all of that extra added detail, it doesn't actually make the skin look that much better. It just makes it look more noisy, to be honest. And that's really... And that, I think, is why Riot elected to keep the changes so minor. For example, the white hair on top of Rakan's head, yeah, we can break that up with a few extra colors. That's perfectly fine. But let's not add a bunch of extra detail to the torso or the wings. And the same thing here. The texture on the heart, yeah, we can actually simplify that a bit, which is what they've done. They've simplified and matted the colors a little bit to make them stand out less in order to help keep the model and the texture readable. So Riot has not made substantial changes, and the reason for that is that you don't always want more detail. You really genuinely don't always want more detail. This is one of the things that bothers me a lot when I look at very old League of Legends gameplay footage is it looks so fucking grainy and noisy because all the textures were lower resolution and everything was sort of rendered in this sharpish Warcraft 3 era fantasy style that was just riddled with fantasy detail. Like, I remember the particle effects in old League of Legends and just how confusing the map could look with just a few characters on screen doing shit. And Riot has been doing a lot of work to try and streamline that from a visual perspective. And this is part of that, is that they don't want to overcomplicate things. I think the criticism, like I said, I've said multiple times, I think the criticism is fair. I think you should always demand that they do better. Always. Every single time. Like, unless they knock it the hell out of the park, you should always demand that they do better. That is our job as consumers, is to hold companies' feet to the fire so that they always put in their best effort. But in this case, I think you can definitely do a better Sweetheart Xayah. I think you can definitely do a better Sweetheart Rakan, but in terms of the fan edits that have been getting a lot of traction, mostly what they do is add detail. They don't change the design in substantive ways that really kind of alter the language. The closest thing we get is Red Sinistra has a really good idea, I think, in redefining the look of the Rakan skin from sort of a theater prince to a more traditional Disney-looking fantasy prince. And I think there's something there in perhaps giving him shoulder pauldrons or something like that, like something that's more stately and regal, that makes him look more sharp, more martial, essentially, as opposed to the very soft and rounded look here that's very indistinct. Like, the old Rakan's primary problem, I think, from my perspective, is that it just doesn't look very interesting. Like, it's a relatively bland skin. It's not a very creative take on the idea of the fantasy prince, but it's not that it's bad, it's just, I've seen it before. This is why the skins didn't really blow me away. The same thing goes for Xayah. Like, it's fine, but it's exactly what I would expect to see from a vaguely Valentine's-themed skin. If anything, with Xayah, I think you could go a little harder on the cruelty of love. Like, if you wanted to do a redefinition of what the skins could be, and I'm not going to draw it because I frankly don't have time, but if you wanted to redefine it, what I would do is I would theme Rakan 100% around the sweetness of love, all the softness and the kindness and the gifts and the prettiness, which is something they've already got going on because he's all white and pink and light purples, right? I would theme him around the sweetness and the kindness and the niceness of love, all the pretty happy things, and then I would take Xayah and I would go a lot harder on the femme fatale. Like, I would go a lot harder on the cruelty of love, on the darker sides of love, and really play that aspect up. And that might mean sexualizing her design a little bit more to kind of emphasize the temptation, the illicitness of it. It might mean, you know, darkening her even more, like make her like deep blood red to kind of contrast with the light, fluffy pastel of Rakan. Like, that will be the kind of changes that I would like to see, that I think would improve the skins as a concept. But when it comes to just adding more detail, which is something that Riot tried to do without going overboard with the changes that they made to the skins, adding detail doesn't really fix it. It doesn't really make it better. It makes it prettier, but as we've discussed, when you zoom out really far, you know, it's adding more noise isn't necessarily a good idea. Because that's the thing with the changes that Riot made. If you look at how they look from a distance, see how the shoulder pauldron on Xayah provides a sort of clear delineation. It breaks up her torso from her arm, but it still keeps the clarity of where the arm is clear. And where they added the gold detailing around the skirt, it actually made the model more readable because it more clearly delineates the legs from the skirt. So it makes the motion of the model easier to read. And the same thing goes for their edits to Rakan, is they added some pink to the hair, but that only makes it easier to track his head around. And because they've changed, you can see here, they've added the dark center to the heart, it's easier to see that it is a heart shape. Whereas before, because the two colors that they have, in the old heart, the gold and the red and then the pink, that all very much blends together. But whereas with the new heart, from a far distance, it's a lot easier to tell that it's a heart shape and where exactly it is. Anyway, those are as close as I can come to giving some kind of useful or constructive take on the whole Xayah Rakan skin thing. And as a takeaway, just to wrap it up, adding more detail makes it look prettier, but it doesn't make it a better skin. And the problem with the Xayah and Rakan Sweetheart skins as they are isn't that they're ugly or unfinished or that Riot didn't put in enough effort in making the skins polished and look nice. The problem is that they're kind of bland and boring and don't really take any creative risks. So, my name has been TB Sky, and you can leave your comments down below if you are so inclined. You should feel very free to like the video or dislike it at your leisure. This footage has been courtesy of SKINSPOTLIGHTS. There will be a link to both of his videos on the Xayah and Rakan skins down in the description. And yeah, subscribe if you're so inclined. And I shall see you very happily in the next video.